My name is Lily Parker. I'm 32 years old, a paralegal in Louisville, Kentucky, and I thought I understood documents better than most people. Wills, deeds, medical authorizations, power of attorney forms. I handled them every week. But nothing in my job prepared me for the afternoon my 82-year-old grandfather pulled me inside his house by the sleeve, shoved me behind an old freezer, and whispered two words that turned my whole family into strangers. "Hide, Lily." I didn't even get to ask why. 30 seconds later, my mother's silver Buick rolled into the gravel driveway. Behind her came my Uncle Rick, my cousin Megan, and a woman carrying a black leather notary bag. That bag held a new will. And by the time I heard what they planned to do with it, I understood something that made my stomach go cold. They hadn't come to visit Grandpa. They had come to take him apart while he was still alive. Welcome back to Raw Drama Stories. This is one of those stories where the loudest people in the family thought silence meant weakness. They thought age meant confusion. They thought paperwork could erase love, memory, and 20 years of sacrifice. They were wrong. And if you've ever been the one who showed up, the one who drove across town, paid the bill, made the appointment, stayed after everyone else left, then you'll understand why I didn't scream that day. I listened. That was the first mistake they made. My grandfather's name was Henry Parker, but nobody called him Henry except the bank and the courthouse. To everyone in Cedar Falls, Kentucky, he was Hank. Hank Parker owned a white two-story farmhouse at the edge of town, where Maple Ridge Road turned narrow and the fields opened up behind the old tobacco barns. The house had a wraparound porch, green shutters, and a screen door that slapped shut if you didn't catch it with your hip. That sound was part of my childhood. So was the smell of Grandpa's house. Coffee, lemon oil, old wood, peppermint candies in a glass dish by the landline. My grandmother Evelyn used to say, "A home remembered everyone who loved it." When I was little, I believed that meant the walls were alive. After she died, I understood what she meant. A home keeps proof. The quilt folded over the upstairs railing. The grocery list in Grandma's handwriting still taped inside the pantry door. The little pencil marks on the kitchen trim where Grandpa measured my height every August until I was 16 and told him I was too old for it. He measured me anyway. "Stand still, lily pad," he'd say. "One day you'll want to know how far you came." I was 8 when I started spending weekends there. My parents had divorced the year before, and my mother, Carol Parker, had decided motherhood looked better from a distance. She wasn't cruel in the obvious ways. She didn't forget my birthdays. She didn't leave me without food. She didn't hit me. She just made sure I understood that I was inconvenient. If I needed a ride, she sighed. If I got sick, she looked irritated before she looked worried. If I asked about money for a school trip, she would open her checkbook like she was opening a wound. Then she'd say, "You know, Lily, your grandfather spoils you too much." Maybe he did. But what my mother called spoiling was usually Grandpa showing up. He showed up to science fairs with a disposable camera. He sat through my middle school choir concert, even though I sang so quietly no one could hear me. He drove 2 hours in a thunderstorm when I called him from my dorm at the University of Kentucky, crying because my roommate had moved out and taken half the rent with her. He didn't ask why I hadn't called my mother first. He already knew. "Pack a bag," he said. "I'll be there by 9. That was Grandpa. He didn't make promises loudly. He just kept them. My Uncle Rick was different. Rick Parker was my mother's younger brother, 54 years old at the time this happened, and the kind of man who always had a business idea, but never a business account with money in it. Used trucks, hunting leases, a barbecue sauce line that never made it past 3 jars and a logo. Every few years, Rick would announce that he was finally about to turn things around. Then the phone calls would start. A little loan, a temporary favor, just until Friday. Grandpa helped him more times than he ever admitted. My mother helped herself. Carol was 58, a dental office manager in Bowling Green, and she had perfected the tone of a daughter who was exhausted by everyone else's failure to appreciate her. "I'm the one who worries," she would say. She said that often. At Thanksgiving, while Grandpa carved the turkey. At Christmas, when she arrived 2 hours late with store-bought pie and acted offended that the coffee had cooled. At Grandma's funeral, while I was standing in the church basement holding a casserole dish and trying not to fall apart. "I'm the one who worries about Dad," she told 3 different people that afternoon. But when Grandma died, I was the one who stayed. I was 24 then, fresh out of college, working my first job as a legal assistant in Louisville for $38,000 a year. I had a 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls, a secondhand couch, and a car that made a clicking noise every time I turned left. Grandpa had been married to Evelyn for 56 years. After she passed, he didn't know what to do with the silence. So every Friday after work, I drove the 96 miles from Louisville to Cedar Falls. I cleaned out the fridge. I sorted bills. I made sure he took his blood pressure medication. I sat at the kitchen table while he drank decaf coffee he hated and told me stories about Grandma like she had only gone into the next room. My mother came when there was an audience. Rick came when he needed cash. I came because someone had to remember that grief didn't end after the funeral potatoes were gone. And because Grandma had made me promise. 2 months before she died, she called me into her bedroom. Her voice was already thin by then, but her eyes were clear. She pointed to Grandpa, asleep in the recliner in the next room, with his reading glasses still in his hand. "Don't let them rush him," she said. I thought she meant grief. I thought she meant, don't let them push him into selling the house too soon. Don't let them throw away her sewing machine or donate her dresses before he was ready. So I promised. "I won't," I told her. She squeezed my wrist. "No, Lily," she whispered. "I mean, don't let them take his choices from him." At the time, I didn't understand. Years later, standing behind that freezer with dust in my nose and my mother's voice in the next room, I finally did. Grandpa had started changing about 3 weeks before everything happened. Not mentally. Not really. But his routine changed. He stopped answering my calls on the first ring. Sometimes he didn't answer at all. His voicemail filled up, which had never happened before because he treated missed calls like unpaid bills. Then he stopped showing up at church on Sundays. Pastor Neil called me first. "Lily," he said carefully, "I don't want to alarm you, but Hank hasn't been here in 2 weeks. Carol said he's been confused lately." I sat up straight at my desk. "Confused how?" There was a pause. "She said he forgot where he put his wallet, that he got mixed up about the electric bill, that he may not be safe living alone." My fingers went still over my keyboard. Grandpa had misplaced his wallet every other Tuesday for 20 years. It was usually in the freezer, the laundry basket, or once, memorably, inside his tackle box. That didn't make him incompetent. That made him Hank. I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. "Mom, why didn't you tell me Grandpa was having problems?" A soft sigh. The kind she used when she wanted me to feel young and unreasonable. Because I knew you'd overreact. I'm his granddaughter. And I'm his daughter, Lily. There it was, the old line. The one she pulled out whenever she needed to remind me that love had a hierarchy, and I was supposed to stand underneath her. What kind of problems? I asked. He's getting older, that's all. Rick and I are handling it. Rick and I. Those 3 words bothered me more than the rest. My Uncle Rick couldn't handle a parking ticket without calling someone to blame the city. What does handling it mean? It means grown people are making grown decisions. I looked through the glass wall of my office at the conference room, where my boss had left a stack of estate files waiting for me. Wills, trust amendments, property transfers. I knew that tone. I had heard it from clients who were hiding something. Mom, I said slowly, has Grandpa signed anything? Silence. Not long. Just long enough. Then she laughed, a small, sharp laugh. Honestly, Lily, you work around lawyers for 5 minutes and suddenly everyone's a criminal. I've worked around lawyers for 9 years. Then you should know enough to stay out of things that don't concern you. She hung up. I sat there with the phone still against my ear. That was when the first cold thought entered my mind. Not fear. Not anger. A question. Why would my mother care whether I asked about paperwork? The next morning was a Thursday, April 18th. I remember because I had a probate filing due at noon and a coffee stain on the sleeve of my white blouse. I was supposed to go to work, finish the filing, and pretend I didn't feel that quiet pull in my chest. Instead, I called my boss, Grace Miller. Grace was 61, an inheritance attorney with silver hair, narrow glasses, and the kind of calm voice that made liars nervous. She had been my boss for almost 7 years, but she had also been Grandma Evelyn's attorney for several private matters. Something's wrong with my grandfather, I told her. Grace didn't ask me to prove it. She just said, go. So I did. I drove to Cedar Falls with a half-empty travel mug in the cup holder and my work bag on the passenger seat. The sky was gray, the kind of spring gray that makes every field look waiting and every road look longer than it is. I called Grandpa 3 times on the way. No answer. By the time I turned onto Maple Ridge Road, my hands were tight on the steering wheel. His mailbox leaned slightly to the left, as always. The gravel driveway curved past the big oak tree. His old red Ford sat beside the garage. The porch light was off, even though the afternoon was dim. I parked behind the hydrangeas, grabbed my bag, and walked to the front door. I had barely lifted my hand to knock when the door opened. Grandpa stood there in his brown cardigan, breathing hard. For half a second, I felt relief. Then I saw his face. Not confused, not weak. Alert. Sharp. Terrified. He grabbed my sleeve and pulled me inside so hard my shoulder hit the doorframe. "Grandpa, quiet," he whispered. He shut the door without letting it slam. "Hide, Lily." "What?" He pointed down the hall toward the back pantry, where Grandma used to store canned peaches and Christmas tins. There was a narrow storage room behind the old chest freezer, barely big enough for a mop bucket and 2 people if neither of them breathed. "Go," he said. "Grandpa, what is happening?" His eyes moved to the front window. I followed his gaze. My mother's Buick was turning into the driveway. Behind it came Rick's black pickup. And behind that, a white sedan I didn't recognize. Grandpa's grip tightened on my arm. "Do exactly what I say," he whispered. "Do not come out. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear." My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Are you in danger?" He looked at me then, really looked. And in his face, I saw something that scared me more than panic. I saw a plan. "No," he said quietly, "but they are about to tell the truth." Then he pushed me into the storage room and pulled the door almost closed. Through the narrow crack between the door and the frame, I could see the front hall, the edge of the kitchen table, and Grandpa walking slowly toward his chair like every step cost him something. By the time my mother knocked, his shoulders had rounded. His face had gone blank. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. The performance started before she even stepped inside, and I was the only witness they didn't know they had. My mother stepped into Grandpa's house like she owned the air inside it. Carol Parker always entered that way, chin lifted, purse tight against her side, eyes moving across every surface as if she were checking for dust she could later mention to someone else. She wore a cream blouse, pearl earrings, and the same soft expression she used at church when she wanted people to think she was patient. Behind her came Uncle Rick, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and truck stop coffee. He was wearing a navy sports coat that didn't fit across his stomach and cowboy boots polished too brightly for a family visit. My cousin Megan followed him, 27 years old, blonde hair curled, phone in her hand, eyes already bored. Then the woman with the black leather bag stepped inside. She was maybe 60, with short gray hair and a red blazer. Her smile was professional, but not warm. The bag in her hand looked heavy. My grandfather stood in front of them, with one hand resting on the back of a kitchen chair. "Carol," he said slowly, like he was surprised to see her. My mother's face changed instantly. The concern appeared. "Oh, Daddy." She crossed the room and kissed his cheek. "You forgot we were coming?" Grandpa blinked at her. "I did?" Rick exchanged a look with her. From behind the storage room door, I pressed my fingertips against my mouth. I knew Grandpa's real voice. I knew the way his eyes sharpened when someone tried to sell him something. I knew the man who could still remember the serial number of the tractor he bought in 1978 and the exact day my grandmother first burned biscuits in that kitchen. This wasn't confusion. This was acting. And he was good. My mother guided him into his chair by the kitchen window. "That's all right," she said gently. "That's why we're here, to help." The woman in the red blazer set her bag on the table. Rick pulled out a chair and sat down too heavily. Megan stayed near the counter, scrolling on her phone. Grandpa looked from face to face. "Who's that lady?" My mother smiled. "This is Janet Moore. She's a notary, remember? We talked about getting some paperwork cleaned up?" Grandpa frowned. "Paperwork?" "Yes, Daddy, your documents." The way she said documents made my skin tighten. In my job, documents were never just paper. They were keys. They moved houses, money, rights, names, power. A person who understood documents understood how much damage could hide behind a clean signature line. Janet opened the bag. Out came a folder, then another, then a thick stack of papers clipped together with a silver binder clip. My mother placed her hand over Grandpa's. "You've been forgetting things lately." "I have?" "Yes." Her voice softened even more. "You forgot to pay the water bill last month." Grandpa lowered his eyes. "The bill was under the newspaper," he murmured. Rick leaned forward. "That's what we mean, Dad. It could have been bad. What if they shut it off? What if you leave the stove on next? Grandpa looked toward the stove like he had never seen it before. My uncle kept going. You're 82. Nobody's blaming you, but you can't manage all this alone anymore. My mother nodded. The house, the accounts, the store property, the land, it's too much. The family store. Parker Hardware had been closed for 6 years, but the building still stood on Main Street, brick front, faded green awning, Grandpa's name painted on the side in letters my grandmother had picked out. He owned it free and clear, along with the half-acre lot behind it. Grandma used to say that store raised the family twice, once through money, once through discipline. Rick had hated working there as a teenager. My mother had acted like stocking shelves was beneath her. I was the one who spent summers sitting on the counter, sorting screws into little drawers while Grandpa told me what every tool was for. Now they were talking about it like inventory. Janet slid the first document toward my grandfather. This is a revised last will and testament, Mr. Parker, she said. Your daughter and son asked me to help make sure your wishes are properly recorded. My wishes? I almost made a sound. Because I knew one thing for certain. Grandpa had a will. Grace Miller had drafted it years ago. I had been working at her office then. I hadn't read the private contents because it wasn't my place, but I knew it existed. I knew Grandma had signed related charitable documents before she died. I knew there had been planning, careful and deliberate. So why was Janet Moore sitting in his kitchen with a new one? Grandpa picked up the pen Janet placed beside the papers, then let it slip from his fingers. It clattered against the table. Megan glanced up, annoyed.
Can we hurry this up? She muttered. I have to be back in Bowling Green by 6.
My mother shot her a look. Rick cleared his throat. Dad, he said louder, as if volume helped memory. This just makes sure the house stays in the family. Carol and I will handle everything. You won't have to worry. Grandpa's voice was small. What about Lily? The room changed. Not loudly, but enough. My mother's hand froze on the table. Rick looked toward the window. Megan stopped moving her thumb over her phone. Janet looked down at the papers. My mother recovered first. Lily is fine, she said. Grandpa tilted his head. She comes by. Yes, Daddy, she visits, but visiting is not the same as responsibility. I felt those words like a slap, even from behind the door. For 8 years, I had driven 96 miles each way after work. I had scheduled his cardiology appointments, replaced his storm door, argued with Medicare over a denied claim, and sat with him through the first Christmas after Grandma died because my mother said seeing the empty chair would be too depressing. But apparently, that was visiting. Rick tapped the document with 2 fingers. This is about family assets, Dad. Big decisions. Lily's young. She doesn't need the burden. My mother's voice dropped. She doesn't need to know everything. There it was. The first crack. Grandpa looked at her for a long moment. Don't need to know? My mother smiled again, but this time it looked strained. Not right now. You know how emotional she gets. She'll make this harder than it needs to be. Emotional. That was the word my mother used whenever someone else had a conscience she found inconvenient. Grandpa stared at the papers. What does it say? Janet adjusted her glasses. In simple terms, Mr. Parker, your residential property, the Maple Ridge Roadhouse, the adjoining 8 acres, your remaining bank accounts, and your interest in the former Parker Hardware building would pass equally to your daughter, Carol Parker, and your son, Richard Parker. My ears started ringing. Grandpa lifted his eyes. And Lily? My mother sighed. She gets a personal remembrance. A what? Janet turned a page. There is a provision for your granddaughter to receive certain sentimental items at the discretion of the executors. At the discretion of the executors. That meant my mother and Rick could give me a box of chipped mugs and call it done. Grandpa looked confused again. Lily liked Evelyn's sewing box. My mother's mouth tightened. She can have the sewing box. I couldn't breathe. Not because of the house. Not because of money. Because they were reducing my grandmother's life to an object they might toss me if I behaved. Then Rick said the sentence that made everything inside me go still. Dad, you already agreed. Once this is signed, Carol can move forward with the buyer. Buyer. My mother turned sharply. Rick. He realized too late. Grandpa blinked. Buyer? Rick rubbed his jaw. For the store property, he said quickly. Potential buyer, nothing final. Megan snorted under her breath. My mother ignored her and leaned close to Grandpa. The important thing is that we protect you before other people start influencing you. Other people. Me. That was when Janet pulled out another document. This one is a durable power of attorney, she said. My chest went cold. A will mattered after death. Power of attorney mattered while he was alive. My mother slid the paper forward. This just lets me help with your accounts. Grandpa stared at it. All my accounts? Only when needed, she said. Rick added, and the property decisions, just practical stuff. Grandpa's hand moved toward the napkin beside his plate. Slowly, almost carelessly, he picked up a pencil from the table. My mother was watching Janet. Rick was watching the driveway. Megan was watching her phone. But I was watching Grandpa. He lowered his head like he was trying to understand the paper. And on the napkin, with a hand that did not shake at all, he wrote one word. Grace. Then he folded the napkin once and slid it beneath the edge of his saucer. My throat tightened. He wanted Grace Miller. He wanted a real attorney. He had known exactly what was happening before I arrived. My mother tapped the signature line. Daddy, sign here. Grandpa picked up the pen again. His hand trembled this time, but now I knew it was theater. I don't know, he whispered. Carol's face hardened for half a second before the softness returned. We've been over this. Rick leaned closer. Don't make this difficult. The room went quiet. Even Megan looked up. Grandpa stared at his son. Then he asked, very softly, what happens if I don't? My mother answered before Rick could. Then we'll have to consider whether you're safe here. The words hung in the kitchen. Not a threat in volume, a threat in meaning. If you don't sign, we'll take the house another way. If you don't obey, we'll call you incompetent. If you don't give us control, we'll say you can't be trusted with your own life. I stood in the dark with my hand over my mouth, and for the first time in my life, I truly hated the sound of my mother's voice. Grandpa looked down at the signature line. My mother whispered, Lily doesn't need to know. By the time he realizes what he signed, it'll be too late. She said it quietly, but not quietly enough. The document said one thing. Her words said another. And Grandpa had made sure I heard both. For almost 10 seconds after my mother said it, nobody moved. At least, that was how it felt from inside the storage room. The freezer hummed beside my shoulder. Dust scratched the back of my throat. My knees were starting to ache from the way I had wedged myself between a metal shelving unit and a stack of old paint cans labeled in Grandpa's careful handwriting. Front porch green. Kitchen trim white. Evelyn's blue. That last can had dried years ago, but he had never thrown it away. Through the crack in the door, I watched my grandfather lower the pen to the paper. My whole body leaned forward before my brain caught up. No, not that paper. Not that signature line. But Grandpa didn't sign. The tip of the pen touched the page, then wandered sideways, making a shaky little mark nowhere near his name. My mother inhaled sharply. "Daddy." Grandpa blinked up at her. "Did I do it wrong?" Rick muttered something under his breath. Janet Moore pressed her lips together and pulled the document back before the ink could smear. "We can print a clean copy," she said. My mother's patience was thinning. I could hear it in the way she tapped her fingernail against the table. "We don't need a clean copy. He just needs to sign where you show him." Janet looked at Grandpa. "Mr. Parker, do you understand what this document does?" That question should have been protection. It should have mattered. A real notary would have stopped the moment there was pressure, confusion, or hesitation. I knew that from watching Grace Miller refuse to notarize documents for clients who couldn't explain them in their own words. But Janet's voice had no concern in it. Only procedure. Grandpa looked at the stack of papers, then at my mother. "I'm tired." Carol's face tightened. "We're all tired." There it was again. That tiny slip. The voice beneath the performance. The daughter who had come to help would have said, "Then we'll stop. We'll do this another day. We'll call your lawyer. We'll make sure you're comfortable." My mother did not say any of that. She turned to Janet. "Can we finish this at his birthday dinner?" Janet hesitated. "When is that?" "Saturday, 2 days from now." Rick leaned back, relieved. "That works. We'll have everyone here anyway. He'll be in a good mood. Cake, family, old friends. He can sign in front of witnesses." Witnesses. My stomach turned. They didn't want witnesses to protect Grandpa. They wanted an audience to make the lie look clean. My mother looked back at Grandpa and brushed lint off his cardigan like he was a child. "You hear that, Daddy? We'll do it Saturday. No more fussing today." Grandpa nodded slowly. "Birthday?" "Yes, your birthday." He smiled faintly. "Evelyn made chocolate cake." For the first time, my mother's expression almost cracked. Not with grief, with irritation. Evelyn has been gone 8 years. Grandpa's eyes lowered. "I know that." He said it so softly, I almost missed the change. For 1 second, Hank Parker was there. Then he disappeared again. Megan pushed away from the counter. "So we're done? Because I really do have to go." Rick stood and started gathering loose papers, but Janet stopped him. "I'll keep these." My mother didn't like that. "I thought I should hold on to them." Janet snapped the folder shut. "Until they're executed, they stay with me." Executed. Such a clean, legal word. Such an ugly thing in that kitchen. My mother's smile returned, thinner now. "Of course." Rick walked toward the door, then turned back. "Dad, don't go calling Lily about this, okay? She'll just get upset." Grandpa looked at him with dull eyes. "Lily?" My uncle laughed. "See? This is what I'm talking about." Megan laughed too, but it sounded nervous. My mother touched Grandpa's shoulder. "We'll be back Saturday at 4. Wear the blue shirt. It looks nice in pictures." Pictures. Of course they wanted pictures. Carol Parker would document herself being a devoted daughter while trying to steal the pen from her father's hand. The front door opened. One by one, they left. My mother's perfume lingered after her, sharp and floral. The screen door clicked, car doors slammed, gravel popped under tires. Then silence. Grandpa sat completely still. I stayed hidden because he had told me not to move, and for once in my life, I was afraid of what would happen if I did the obvious thing. A full minute passed. Then another. Finally, Grandpa turned his head toward the pantry. "You can come out now, Lily Pad." My legs almost failed when I stepped into the kitchen. He was still sitting by the window, one hand on the table, the other curled around the edge of the saucer where he had hidden the napkin. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I looked at the chair where my mother had sat. The folder was gone, but I could still see the faint impression it had left on the table runner. A rectangle of pressure. That was what my family had brought into that house. Pressure disguised as care. "Grandpa," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted. "What is going on?" He closed his eyes. The trembling stopped. When he opened his eyes again, the confused old man was gone. In his place was the grandfather who had taught me how to bait a hook, balance a checkbook, and read a person's face before trusting their words. "I'm sorry you had to hear it that way," he said. "You hid me." "I did." "Because you knew they were coming." "Yes." I stared at him. "You wanted me to hear them." He picked up the folded napkin and slid it toward me. "Grace." The single word sat there in pencil, firm and clear. "I needed you to hear them without them knowing you were in the room," he said. "If I told you what they'd been doing, you would have thought I was being stubborn, or lonely, or suspicious. I would not have thought that." He gave me a sad little smile. "You love your mother, Lily, even when you don't want to." I looked away. That sentence hurt because it was true. Love does not always die the first time someone disappoints you. Sometimes it survives 1,000 small humiliations and keeps looking for one good explanation. But what I had just heard didn't have a good explanation. "They're trying to take your house," I said. "They're trying to take more than that." The quiet in the room changed. Grandpa pushed himself up from the chair. He didn't move like a weak man. He moved like an old man who had decided to spend his strength carefully. "Come with me." I followed him down the hall, past framed photographs and the grandfather clock that had stopped at 2:17 3 years earlier. He had never fixed it because that was the time Grandma Evelyn died. At her bedroom door, he paused. Nobody used that room anymore. Not really. He kept it clean. He opened the curtains every morning. He changed the sheets once a month, though no one slept there. Her perfume bottle still sat on the dresser, empty except for one amber drop at the bottom. My mother called it unhealthy. Grandpa called it respect. He opened the door and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of lavender sachets and cedar. Sunlight fell across the blue quilt Grandma had sewn by hand, the one made from scraps of dresses she wore before I was born. Grandpa crossed to the corner beside the wardrobe, and lowered himself carefully to one knee. "Help me with this board." I crouched beside him. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then he pressed his thumb against a knot in the floorboard, and one end lifted slightly. A hidden compartment. My breath caught. "You had this the whole time?" He smiled without humor. "Your grandmother liked mysteries." Together we lifted the narrow board. Beneath it sat a metal lockbox, gray, dented at one corner, with a strip of masking tape across the top. EPHP. Evelyn Parker. Henry Parker. Grandpa took a small key from his shirt pocket. "My father kept war bonds in this box," he said. "Your grandmother kept recipes." I kept the truth. The lock clicked open. Inside were folders, envelopes, a flash drive, and a letter tied with a faded yellow ribbon. On top lay a document in Grace Miller's formatting. Last Will and Testament of Henry Allen Parker. Not Janet Moore's version. Not my mother's version. The real one. I picked it up with both hands. The paper felt heavier than paper should. Grandpa sat on the edge of the bed. "Read the first page." So I did. At first, the legal language was familiar. Name, county, sound mind, revocation of prior wills, appointment of executor. Then I reached the distribution section. I read it once, then again. My voice disappeared. Because the house on Maple Ridge Road was not left to Carol. It was not left to Rick. It was not left to me. It was to be transferred after Grandpa's death into the Evelyn Parker Foundation, a nonprofit trust established to provide temporary housing assistance for elderly veterans in Cedar Falls County. The old family store was to be renovated and used as the foundation office and community supply pantry. And $280,000 from Grandpa's investment account was reserved for scholarships for young women entering nursing programs in Kentucky. I looked up. Grandpa's eyes were wet, but his voice stayed steady. "Your grandmother was a nurse before we married. She never got to finish the work she wanted. We decided this together." My throat tightened. "And me?" "You are named as trustee," he said. "Not because we wanted to burden you, because you are the only one who would protect it after I'm gone." I looked back down at the will. There was my name. Lily Ann Parker. Not erased. Trusted. That was when I saw the second folder. It had one word written across the tab. Buyer. Grandpa nodded toward it. "Open that one." Inside were printed emails, a purchase agreement, and a receipt for $25,000. An earnest money deposit. The proposed buyer was a development company out of Lexington. The property description included Grandpa's house, the 8 acres, and the old Parker hardware building. My mother and Rick had already promised away land they did not own. All they needed was his signature. And Saturday, in front of everyone, they planned to get it. I sat on the edge of Grandma Evelyn's bed with the buyer folder open in my lap, staring at a signature line my grandfather had never seen. Carol Parker. Richard Parker. Not as owners, as authorized representatives. The words made my vision sharpen. My mother and uncle had signed a preliminary sale agreement on Grandpa's property as if they already had control. The purchase price was listed at $690,000. Closing was scheduled for May 31st. The buyer, Blue Ridge Community Development, LLC, had already wired a $25,000 earnest money deposit to Rick's business account. Not an escrow account. Rick's account. That was the first mistake in ink. I looked up at Grandpa. "How did you get this?" He reached into the lockbox and pulled out another envelope. Billy Nash. I knew that name. Billy owned Nash Realty on Main Street, 2 doors down from the old hardware store. He had gone fishing with Grandpa for 30 years and still sent him a Christmas card with a picture of his grandkids standing next to a deer nobody needed to see. "He called me last week," Grandpa said. "Said a developer asked him what he knew about the Parker land. Said they had it under contract." My stomach turned. "And he told you?" He said, "Hank, either you sold your place and forgot to tell me, or somebody is selling something that isn't theirs." That sounded like Billy. Grandpa opened the envelope and handed me a printed email. It was from Billy to Grandpa, dated April 9th at 7:42 p.m. Attached were the sale documents the buyer's agent had forwarded for local title confirmation. My mother had told the buyer Grandpa was too ill to manage the transaction himself. Rick had told them power of attorney paperwork was being finalized. Paperwork. Always paperwork. Clean words for dirty hands. I pressed my palm against the folder. "Grandpa, this is fraud." "I know." "Why didn't you call Grace right away?" "I did." I blinked. He gave me a tired smile. "You think I wrote her name on that napkin because I suddenly remembered she existed?" For the first time all day, a laugh almost came out of me, but it broke before it became anything. "She knows?" "She knows enough. But she told me we needed proof they were pressuring me. Not just documents, conduct, witnesses. Something no one could call a family misunderstanding." He looked toward the hallway. "So I let them come." I stared at him, stunned by the patience of it. For weeks, my grandfather had answered wrong on purpose, forgotten dates on purpose, let people repeat themselves and talk over him and lower their voices around him like he had already left the room. Not because he was weak, because he was listening. "And you hid me," I said, "because Grace said one credible witness could matter, especially one who understands what she heard." The room felt suddenly smaller. I worked with estate files every day. I knew exactly what undue influence looked like. Isolation, pressure, urgency. A trusted family member controlling access, claims of confusion, a replacement document prepared by someone other than the original attorney, a notary who arrived with papers already stacked and expectations already formed. My family had used the whole checklist, and I had heard it from 10 feet away. Grandpa reached for the ribbon-tied letter in the box. "This is from your grandmother." I took it carefully. The envelope had yellowed at the corners. My name was written across the front in Evelyn Parker's round, patient handwriting. "For Lily, when it is time." My hands didn't want to open it. Some things feel too sacred to touch when you're still angry. But Grandpa nodded. So I unfolded the letter. "My dear Lily, if you are reading this, then your grandfather has decided he needs help protecting what we built. I wish I could be there to do it myself. Since I cannot, I am trusting you with the part of me that remains on this earth." The house was never just a house. It held soldiers who came home and did not know where to sleep. It held young mothers who needed formula from the hardware store on credit. It held neighbors after storms. It held you when your mother forgot how to. I read that sentence twice. It held you when your mother forgot how to. The words blurred. Grandma had known. All those weekends when she pressed an extra biscuit into my hand and pretended not to notice I didn't want to go home, she had known. I kept reading. Do not let anyone turn our home into a prize. Do not let them sell our name to cover their mistakes. Your grandfather and I chose you because you understand care without applause. But remember this, Lily. Being kind does not mean being available for theft. I stopped there. Grandpa looked out the window, giving me the dignity of not watching me cry. I folded the letter back along the old creases. What do you want me to do? I asked. He turned back to me. Help me stop them. There are moments when life gives you a clean before and after. Before, I was the granddaughter who kept peace, returned calls, softened my mother's sharp edges in my own mind, and told myself Rick was harmless because calling him dangerous felt too dramatic. After, I was a paralegal, sitting beside an 82-year-old man with a lockbox full of proof, and 2 days before a fake birthday performance designed to steal his life. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand. Then we do it properly. Grandpa smiled. That sounds like Evelyn. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called Grace Miller. She answered on the second ring. Lily? You were right, I said. They came today. Her voice changed. Did you hear them? All of it. Did Hank sign anything? No. Good. Where are you? Grandma's room. We have the original will, the foundation papers, the buyer agreement, emails from Billy Nash, and a letter from Evelyn. Grace was quiet for half a second. Then she said, Put everything back in the lockbox except copies. Do not let those originals leave the house without me present. I'm driving there now. It took Grace 1 hour and 14 minutes to arrive. I know because I spent every minute of it photographing documents on Grandpa's kitchen table, using a hardcover church cookbook to flatten the curled pages. I took pictures of the will, the foundation trust, the scholarship clause, the buyer emails, the $25,000 receipt, and the power of attorney draft Grandpa had managed to keep a copy of from an earlier visit when Rick left it in the printer tray. Grandpa made coffee. Real coffee. Not decaf. When I looked at him, he shrugged. I'm being defrauded. I think I can have caffeine. At 5:26 p.m., Grace Miller's gray Volvo pulled into the driveway. She came in wearing her navy suit, carrying a briefcase and the expression she used when someone had mistaken her politeness for permission. She hugged Grandpa first. Not like an attorney, like an old friend. Then she turned to me. Tell me exactly what you heard. Start from the moment they entered. Do not summarize. Use their words. So I did. I told her about Janet Moore, the new will, the power of attorney, Rick mentioning the buyer, my mother saying I didn't need to know, the threat about whether Grandpa was safe living alone. Grace took notes without interrupting. When I finished, she removed her glasses. That is enough for an emergency plan. What kind of plan? I asked. The kind your mother will not see coming. By 7 o'clock that evening, the kitchen table had become a command center. Grace called Dr. Samuel Keene, Grandpa's longtime physician, and arranged a full cognitive evaluation for Friday morning at 9 o'clock. She called Billy Nash and asked him to prepare a signed statement confirming how he received the sale documents. She called the county recorder's office to verify that no deed or power of attorney had been filed. Then she called Janet Moore. She put the phone on speaker. Ms. Moore, Grace said, calm as winter. This is Grace Miller, attorney for Henry Parker. Please confirm whether you prepared estate documents for him without contacting his existing counsel.
Janet paused. I was contacted by his daughter.
That was not my question.
Another pause.
I was asked to notarize documents. Documents you brought into his home today while family members pressured him to sign? Janet's voice sharpened. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything yet, Grace said. I'm preserving the record. The room went silent. On the table, Grandma's letter rested beside the buyer agreement. The past and the scheme, side by side. After Janet hung up, Grace looked at Grandpa. Saturday still happens. I turned to her. What? If we stop it privately, Carol and Rick will rewrite the story by Monday. They'll say Lily manipulated you. They'll say I confused you. They'll say everyone misunderstood. Grandpa nodded once. Grace tapped the folder. So we let them gather their witnesses. The document said otherwise, and this time, we would be ready. Friday morning, Grandpa wore his blue button-down shirt to Dr. Samuel Keene's office. Not because my mother had told him it looked nice in pictures. Because Grandma Evelyn had bought it for him on their 50th anniversary, and he said he wanted to feel like she was sitting beside him. I drove him there at 8:20 a.m. The office was in a low brick building behind Cedar Falls Memorial Clinic, with a magnolia tree out front and a waiting room that smelled like hand sanitizer and old magazines. Grandpa walked in steady, signed his own name on the clipboard, and made small talk with the receptionist about her son's baseball scholarship. No confusion, no wandering, no blank stare. Just Hank Parker, exactly as he was when no one was trying to take something from him. Dr. Keene had known him for 22 years. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a voice that never hurried. Grace met us there with her briefcase and a yellow legal pad, but she did not sit in the exam room during the evaluation. She said it was cleaner that way. No one could claim she coached him. For 90 minutes, Dr. Keene asked Grandpa questions. Date, place, president, medication list, recent events, financial responsibilities, family relationships, property ownership, what a will did, what a power of attorney did, what would happen if he signed one. Grandpa answered every question. When Dr. Keene asked him why he had acted confused in front of Carol and Rick, Grandpa looked toward the window. Because people speak more freely when they think you've already left the room. Dr. Keene stopped writing. Then he nodded once and wrote that down too. At 10:37 a.m., he printed the report. Henry Allen Parker is alert and oriented to person, place, time, and situation. He demonstrates intact memory, judgment, reasoning, and understanding of financial and legal decisions. In my medical opinion, Mr. Parker has capacity to manage his own affairs and execute or refuse legal documents. Grace read it twice. Then she placed it into the front pocket of a black folder. Good, she said. Grandpa looked at her. Good enough? Grace's eyes lifted. Good enough to make them regret underestimating you. After the doctor's appointment, we drove to First Cedar Falls Bank. Grandpa had banked there since 1969. The branch manager, Thomas Whitaker, still called him Mr. Parker, even though Grandpa had told him to stop for 15 years. Thomas met us in a glass office near the back. Grace showed him her identification, her attorney letter, and the signed medical evaluation. Grandpa requested a review of all account access, recent inquiries, and attempted changes. Thomas typed for a long time. Then his face changed. Not dramatically, Bankers are trained not to look dramatic. But I saw his jaw tighten. There was an inquiry on April 11th, he said. From who? Grace asked. Thomas looked at Grandpa before answering. Carol Parker came in with Richard Parker. They asked what documents would be needed to add Carol as an authorized signer on your checking and investment accounts. Grandpa's hands rested flat on his knees. And what did you tell them? That we would need your presence, valid identification, and signed authorization, or a valid power of attorney. Grace wrote it down. Anything else? Thomas hesitated. They also asked whether large transfers could be made immediately after authorization was granted. The office went still. Large transfers. Not help with bills. Not protection. Access. Grandpa looked older in that moment, but not weaker. Just sad in a way that made my chest hurt. Thomas printed a statement of the inquiry and signed it. Then Grandpa removed Carol and Rick from the emergency contact notes on his accounts and added me and Grace as legal contact only, not owners. That mattered. We were not doing what they had done. We were not taking control. We were protecting his right to keep it. By noon, Grace had copies of the bank statement, Dr. Keene's report, Billy Nash's signed letter, the original will inventory, the buyer agreement, and my written statement of what I had heard from the storage room. She also had one more thing, a voicemail. At 12:18 p.m., while we were sitting at Grandpa's kitchen table eating tomato soup because he insisted everyone needed lunch before war, my phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring. She called again, then again. On the fourth call, Grace raised one finger. Let it go to voicemail. I did. The message arrived 30 seconds later. My mother's voice filled the kitchen. Lily, I don't know what you think you're doing, but stay away from your grandfather this weekend. You confuse him. He gets upset after you visit. Your uncle and I are handling everything, and if you interfere, I will make sure everyone knows you are taking advantage of a vulnerable old man. I stared at the phone. There it was. The accusation prepared in advance. Grace's face showed no surprise. Save it, she said. Forward it to me. Grandpa looked down at his soup. She sounds like her mother when she's afraid. I had never heard him say that before. My grandmother had been warm and steady, but Carol's mother, my great-grandmother June, had died before I was born. Family stories painted her as sharp, proud, and impossible to please. Was Mom always like this? I asked before I could stop myself. Grandpa was quiet for a long time. No, he said finally. She was a little girl who wanted to be first in every room because she never felt first in her own skin. That answer hurt more than anger would have. Because it made my mother human. Not innocent. Human. Rick, he explained, had been different. Charming, careless, always forgiven too quickly because he could make people laugh before they demanded repayment. Carol resented him for that. Rick resented Carol for looking more responsible. They had spent their whole lives competing over who deserved more sympathy. And now they had found something to agree on. Grandpa's property. At 2:05 p.m., Billy Nash came by with a manila envelope and a face full of worry. He removed his cap the second he stepped inside. Hank, I should have called sooner. You called in time, Grandpa said. Billy handed Grace the envelope. Inside were emails from the developer's agent, printed in order, with the sale agreement and closing schedule attached. One message said Carol Parker had represented that her father's mental condition was declining and that the family wished to complete the transition before complications arose. Complications. That meant Grandpa. Alive and unwilling. Billy swallowed hard. I told them I wouldn't touch it without a recorded power of attorney or a deed signed by Hank in person. They stopped calling me after that. Grace looked at the emails. Did they mention the birthday dinner? Billy's expression tightened. Rick did. Said by Saturday evening, everything would be squared away. Saturday evening. The phrase sat in the kitchen like a date on a headstone. After Billy left, Grandpa stood and went to the china cabinet. From the bottom drawer, he took out a small brass house key tied to a faded green ribbon. I recognized it immediately. It had been Grandma's key. She used to wear it on a hook by the back door. Grandpa placed it in my palm. For tomorrow, he said. What is this for? The lockbox. The back room at the store. Evelyn kept duplicates there. Grace looked up. Are you sure? Grandpa nodded. If they try to say Lily invented those documents, we show where the originals lived before I moved them. So that afternoon, Grace and I drove to Parker Hardware. The building smelled like dust, cedar shavings, and the ghost of machine oil. Sunlight cut through the front windows in pale strips. The old counter still had scratches from decades of keys being cut and paint cans being opened. In the back room, behind a pegboard wall, the brass key opened a narrow cabinet. Inside were duplicate foundation papers, Grandma's handwritten notes, old store ledgers, and photographs of veterans Grandpa had helped over the years without ever telling anyone. Rent receipts, utility checks, letters of thanks. Proof that the foundation had not been a sudden idea. It had been their life's work waiting for a legal name. I stood there, holding a photo of Grandpa and Grandma beside a man in a faded army jacket, all three of them smiling in front of the store. And I understood something my mother never had. Inheritance was not always something you received. Sometimes it was something you were trusted to protect. By the time we returned to the house, the sun was low, and 3 cars had slowed in front of the driveway. News had already started moving. Carol was inviting people. Rick was probably bragging that the old man was finally signing. Megan was probably choosing a dress for pictures. They thought Saturday would be their stage. They thought Grandpa would sit in his chair and tremble. They thought I would be too emotional to do anything but cry. That night, Grace laid out the plan. Grandpa would allow them to begin. Janet would present the documents. Carol would make her speech. Rick would expose his urgency if given enough rope. Then Grace would enter through the back door with Billy Nash, Dr. Keene's report, Thomas Whitaker's bank statement, and the original will. I would not speak first. That was the hardest part. You wait, Grace told me. The truth lands harder when the lie has finished introducing itself. Grandpa looked at the folder in front of him. Then he smiled, small and sad. They always wanted an audience. He touched Grandma's key where it lay on the table. Tomorrow, they get one. Saturday morning, Cedar Falls woke up pretending nothing was wrong. That was one of the cruel things about a day like that. The birds still moved through the oak tree. The church bell still rang at noon. The bakery on Main Street still put cinnamon rolls in the window, and the woman at the gas station still asked if I wanted a receipt. The world did not pause just because my family was about to break in public. Grandpa was already dressed and I came downstairs from the guest room at 7:15. Blue shirt, gray slacks, brown cardigan folded neatly over the back of his chair. On the kitchen table sat Grandma Evelyn's brass key, the black folder, and a small framed photograph of her taken on their 40th anniversary. She was standing on the porch in a yellow dress, laughing at something outside the frame. Grandpa had made coffee and toast. 2 plates. Like it was any other Saturday. "You slept?" he asked. "No." "Good," he said. "Neither did I. Now we're even." I almost smiled. He buttered his toast carefully, all the way to the corners the way Grandma used to scold him for not doing. At 8:03, my mother texted me. "Don't come early. Dad needs a calm day." I showed Grandpa. He read it, then handed the phone back. "She means she needs a quiet hallway to set the trap." That sentence stayed with me all morning. Because she did need quiet. She needed me absent, Grandpa agreeable, Rick confident, Janet prepared, and a house full of people who would confuse performance with truth. By 10, the first folding tables arrived. Rick dropped them off in his pickup, with my cousin Megan in the passenger seat. I watched from the upstairs window while he unloaded them onto the porch. He didn't knock. He just used his key. Grandpa had given Rick that key 10 years earlier, when Grandma got sick, in case of emergencies. Rick had used it twice for actual emergencies, and at least a dozen times to walk in like the house still belonged partly to him. When the front door opened, Grandpa was in the living room, sitting in his chair by the window, with a lap blanket over his knees. I was in the hallway, just out of sight. Rick came in carrying a stack of white plastic tablecloths. "Morning, Dad," he called. "Big day." Grandpa looked up slowly. "Is it?" Rick gave him a grin that made my fingers curl. "Sure is. 82. Not everybody makes it that far." Megan followed him with a box of paper plates. "Where's Lily?" she asked. I went still. Rick shrugged. "Carol told her not to make this about herself." Megan laughed softly. "She always does." I had paid Megan's car insurance for 6 months when she lost her job at the salon and was too embarrassed to tell Rick. She had cried into my phone at midnight. Now I was, "She always does." That was how fast kindness disappeared when people thought you had no more use. Grandpa stared at the TV, which wasn't on. "Lily's a good girl." Rick sighed like Grandpa had mentioned a stray dog. "Yeah, Dad. Nobody said she isn't." But the way he said it meant the opposite. By noon, Grace arrived through the back door with a garment bag over one arm and her briefcase in the other. She had changed from her usual navy suit into a simple gray dress and cardigan so she could blend in with the guests at first. Billy Nash came with her, wearing a clean plaid shirt and carrying a folder under his arm. Dr. Keene would arrive at 4:30, after his clinic hours. Thomas Whitaker from the bank would come only if needed. Grace said bankers preferred documents to drama, but he had agreed to be available by phone and appear if the accusation turned toward Grandpa's accounts. We put the evidence in 3 places. The original will, Grandma's letter, and foundation papers stayed in the lockbox in Evelyn's room. Copies went into Grace's briefcase. A second set went into my work tote, which I placed under the hall table beside a stack of birthday napkins. The old house had held family secrets for decades. That day, it held proof. At 3:40, cars started pulling in. Aunt Linda from Frankfurt, Pastor Neil and his wife, 2 neighbors from across the road, Billy's sister, who had worked at Parker Hardware in the 70s. A few cousins I hadn't seen since Grandma's funeral. People came carrying casseroles, cards, balloons, and the kind of cheerful voices people use when they do not know they have walked into the last act of a lie. My mother arrived at 3:58, exactly 2 minutes before the time she had announced. She stepped out of the Buick in a pale blue dress and low heels, carrying a bakery box tied with string. She looked beautiful, in the way she always looked beautiful when she planned to be seen. Rick met her by the porch. They spoke quietly. Then Janet Moore pulled into the driveway. No birthday gift, no card, just the black leather bag. My stomach tightened. Grace stood beside me in the kitchen, arranging cups on a tray as if she had no idea who Janet was. "Breathe," she said, without looking at me. "I am." "No, you are holding your breath politely." I let air out through my nose. That woman is carrying fake documents into my grandfather's birthday party. Grace picked up another cup. "Then let her carry them all the way to the table." At 4, my mother clapped her hands in the dining room. "Everyone, food first. Dad gets tired, so we're going to keep things moving." Keep things moving. I heard the urgency beneath it. Grandpa sat at the head of the table in his blue shirt. He looked smaller with all those people around him, but not because he had shrunk, because everyone had decided to look at him through my mother's story. Fragile, fading, ready to be managed. Pastor Neil asked him about church. Grandpa answered vaguely. Aunt Linda asked if he remembered her peach cobbler. Grandpa called it apple pie. Rick chuckled too loudly. Carol smiled sadly each time, collecting those moments like coins. See, look how confused he is. At 4:22, Megan posted a photo of Grandpa on Instagram. "Happy 82nd to the family legend. Big changes coming. So proud of Mom for taking care of everything." I saw it because my phone buzzed in my pocket. Big changes coming. They were not even hiding the celebration. At 4:37, my mother stood. She tapped a spoon against her water glass. The room quieted. Grandpa looked down at his folded hands. Rick moved to stand behind his chair. Janet set her bag on the sideboard. Grace stood near the kitchen doorway, invisible to anyone who did not know what to look for. My mother smiled at the room. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Daddy today," she began. 82 years is a blessing. And as many of you know, the last year has been difficult. A few people nodded. I watched Pastor Neil's face. He did not nod. My mother put one hand to her chest. As a family, we have had to face some painful realities. Dad is still Dad, of course. We love him deeply. But he has been struggling, forgetting bills, misplacing things, getting confused about visitors. Her eyes flicked toward me. "Only once. Enough." And because we love him, Rick and I have decided to step up. There it was. The speech. Not Grandpa decided, not Dad asked. Rick and I decided. She continued, voice thick now. "Dad has chosen to update his will and give me authority to help with his affairs so there are no problems later. He wanted transparency, so we thought it was best to do this with family present." Janet removed the documents from her bag. The room shifted uncomfortably. Nobody likes legal papers at a birthday party. But nobody spoke. That is how families help lies grow. Not by agreeing, by staying quiet because the truth would be awkward. My mother turned to Grandpa. "Daddy, this is what we discussed." Grandpa stared at the papers. Rick leaned down. "Just sign, Dad." Janet placed the pen beside the signature line. My mother said softly, "It's okay. Lily won't interfere this time." The room went still, because she had said the quiet part too loudly. I stepped forward from the kitchen doorway. Grace's hand brushed my arm once. "Wait." So I waited. Grandpa lifted the pen. His hand trembled beautifully. Rick smiled. Carol exhaled. Janet bent over the page. Then Grandpa set the pen down without signing. He looked at my mother and said, "Carol, what am I signing?" She froze. Rick's smile disappeared. "You know what it is, Dad." Grandpa turned toward him. "Then tell them." The silence thickened. My mother laughed once, too high. "Daddy's tired." Grandpa sat straighter. "No," he said. "I'm listening." And for the first time all day, the room saw him. Not the version my mother had prepared. Him. Then Grace Miller walked to the table, placed her black folder beside Janet's documents, and said calmly, "Before Mr. Parker signs anything, everyone needs to read the first page." Nobody touched the papers. For a moment, all anyone heard was the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the faint creak of Grandpa's chair as he sat up straighter than he had all afternoon. My mother looked at Grace like she had found a snake on the birthday table. "What are you doing here?" Grace did not raise her voice. "I am Henry Parker's attorney." Janet Moore's face changed first. Not guilt. Calculation. She looked from Grace to Grandpa, then down at the documents she had brought, as if they had suddenly become heavier. Rick stepped forward. "This is a private family matter." Grace opened her folder. "Then you should not have invited a notary, half the county, and a buyer's deadline into it." Aunt Linda whispered, "Buyer?" My mother's eyes snapped toward Rick. He had gone pale. Grace slid the first page across the table toward Pastor Neil. "Before anyone decides what this is, I think Mr. Parker deserves the courtesy of having facts read in the same room where accusations were made." My mother reached for the paper. Grandpa's voice stopped her. "Carol?" One word. Not loud. But it landed like a hand on the table. She froze. Grandpa looked at Pastor Neil. "Read it, please." Pastor Neil adjusted his glasses. His mouth tightened as his eyes moved across the page. "This is a medical evaluation dated yesterday," he said slowly. "From Dr. Samuel Keene. It states that Henry Allen Parker is alert and oriented, with intact memory, judgment, reasoning, and understanding of legal and financial decisions." The room shifted. My mother laughed nervously. "One doctor's opinion doesn't change what we've all seen." The front door opened. Dr. Keene stepped inside in his clinic coat, holding his own signed copy. "It was a full cognitive evaluation, Carol," he said, "and I stand by it." The room went silent. My mother's face drained of color. Rick pointed at me. "She set this up." I finally spoke. "No, Grandpa did." Megan looked between us, confused now, scared now. Not innocent exactly, but no longer certain which side would protect her. Grace placed the second document on the table. This is a statement from First Cedar Falls Bank. On April 11th, Carol Parker and Richard Parker asked what would be required to gain access to Mr. Parker's accounts and whether large transfers could be made immediately afterward. Someone gasped. My mother's eyes filled with tears so quickly it almost impressed me. That is not fair. We were trying to help him. Grandpa looked at her. Help me do what? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Grace placed the next packet down. This is a preliminary purchase agreement for the Maple Ridge Roadhouse, the 8 acres, and the former Parker Hardware Building. Purchase price, $690,000. Earnest money deposit, $25,000. Paid to Richard Parker's business account. Rick's chair scraped backward. That was temporary. Billy Nash stepped forward from the hallway. No, Rick. That was illegal. Rick stared at him. Billy held up the email packet. The buyer's agent sent me the paperwork because they wanted local title confirmation. Carol represented that Hank's mental condition was declining and that power of attorney paperwork would be completed before closing. Aunt Linda covered her mouth. Pastor Neil looked at my mother like he had never seen her before. That was when Janet Moore began packing her bag. Grace turned her head. Ms. Moore, I would not leave yet. Janet stopped. You have no authority to detain me. No, Grace said, but I have your name on documents prepared for an elderly man represented by existing counsel, brought to his home under family pressure after a buyer agreement had already been signed. You may want to hear what gets said before you decide whether silence helps you. Janet's hand slowly left the bag. My mother's tears spilled over. Daddy, she whispered, turning to Grandpa. Please, they are twisting this. Rick was in debt. I was trying to keep everything from falling apart. You don't know what it's like to spend your whole life watching everyone praise Lily while I was the daughter who had to carry the family name. A sharp laugh escaped me before I could stop it. She turned on me. You think you're better than me because you drove here on Fridays? No, I said. I think I drove here on Fridays. That was all. No speech, no screaming. Just the truth with the decorations stripped off. Grandpa reached into Grace's folder and took out Grandma Evelyn's letter. His fingers rested on the ribbon for a moment. Your mother saw this clearly before I did, he said. My mother went still. He unfolded the letter, but he did not read all of it. He read only one line. Do not let anyone turn our home into a prize. His voice almost broke on the last word. Then he placed the real will on top of Janet's papers. This is my will, he said, written with Grace, signed years ago while Evelyn was still alive enough to argue over every comma. The house will become part of the Evelyn Parker Foundation. The store will serve elderly veterans. The scholarship fund will help young women become nurses. He looked around the room. It was never Carol's. It was never Rick's. It was never Lily's to take either. Then he looked at me. Lily was trusted to protect it. My mother stared at the will like it had betrayed her. Rick rubbed both hands over his face. Megan sat down slowly, her phone forgotten in her lap. The cake sat untouched on the sideboard. White frosting, blue letters, candles still in the box. Happy 82nd, Hank. Nobody sang. Nobody asked for plates. The lie had collapsed too cleanly for celebration. Rick tried first. Dad, I can fix this. I'll return the deposit. Grace looked at him. You will return it by Monday. through counsel, with a signed release from the buyer. If you do not, we pursue fraud. My mother turned toward Janet. You said this was simple. Janet's voice was thin. I said he had to understand what he was signing. You brought the papers. At your request. And there it was. The beautiful thing about people who build lies together is that once the roof starts falling, they stop holding it up and start pointing at each other. By Monday, Rick returned the $25,000, though I later learned he had to sell his truck to do it. Blue Ridge Community Development withdrew from the agreement and sent Grace a letter denying knowledge of the family pressure. Janet Moore's commission was reviewed after Grace filed a formal complaint with the state notary administrator. She did not lose everything, but she lost the thing people like her needed most: quiet trust. My mother did not apologize that day. She left before the cake was cut. At the door, she looked back at Grandpa and said, I hope you're happy choosing strangers over your own daughter. Grandpa stood with Grandma's brass key in his hand. No, Carol, he said. I am choosing the promise I made before you decided promises were obstacles. She flinched. Then she walked out. Rick followed her. Megan stayed. That surprised me. She sat at the kitchen table for almost 20 minutes after everyone else left, twisting her phone in both hands. Finally, she looked at me and said, I didn't know about the buyer money. I believed her, not because she deserved belief automatically. Because her face had the stunned, embarrassed look of someone realizing she had been used as furniture in someone else's scheme. I did know they were trying to keep you away, she added. I nodded. That part matters too. She cried then, quietly. I didn't comfort her the way old Lily would have. I handed her a napkin and let the silence teach what my softness never could. 6 months later, the Evelyn Parker Foundation opened in the old hardware store. We kept the green awning. We repainted the letters. Parker Hardware became Parker House Outreach, though Grandpa insisted we leave one old wall of nail bins exactly as it was because a place should remember its first job. The first veteran we helped was a 76-year-old Marine named Walter Briggs, who had been sleeping in his truck behind the laundromat. The first scholarship went to a 19-year-old nursing student from Cedar Falls Community College named Tessa Green, whose mother cried so hard during the award ceremony that Grandpa handed her his handkerchief and pretended he had allergies. Grandpa still lives in the farmhouse. He is 83 now. He answers my calls on the second ring because he says the first ring keeps me humble. My mother sends cards on holidays. I do not answer all of them. Boundaries are not cruelty. Sometimes they are the only honest language left. Rick moved to Tennessee for a sales job. Megan and I speak carefully, not often, but without pretending. And every Saturday, when I visit Grandpa, Grandma's brass key hangs by the back door again. Not hidden, not buried. Right where everyone can see it. I used to think family meant staying available, no matter how badly people treated you. I thought love meant explaining away the hurt until it became something softer. But I learned something in that storage room. Truth does not need to shout. It only needs one witness, brave enough to step out when the time comes. My grandfather did not hide me because he wanted me silent. He hid me so I could hear. And when the door finally opened, I stopped being the girl waiting to be included in a family that only valued me when I was useful. I became the woman holding the folder, the woman with the key. The woman who understood that generosity is not permission to be erased. If this story made you think of someone who always expects you to stay quiet, tell me in the comments what you would have done at that birthday table. And if you want more stories about family, betrayal, evidence, and quiet justice, subscribe to Raw Drama Stories. Because sometimes the most powerful sentence is not shouted. Sometimes it is simply placed on the table and read out loud.